All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to focus on impactful theories that are suppressed, things that you should know about but you don't because nobody told you about it and they made it difficult for you to find it. I've been digging around for 3.5 decades, and I've happened to stumble across some things that you may want to hear about. And so today we're doing another Bible Decode number 296. There's a lot of things about the Bible that you probably don't know about, and not necessarily things that are in the Bible, although I try to focus on the text quite often, but also the context of the Bible. What is it that you're reading? What is the Bible? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? When did they write it? Why did they write it? What were they talking about? There's a lot of agendas that are, hidden behind those seemingly innocent words, and then also there's a lot of history. It's very difficult, I would say, to be able to fully understand. I don't think you can really fully understand texts that were written that long ago, but you really should have some type of understanding of Jewish history and Roman history to be able to figure out what was at stake, and who are the players and what are their motivations, and what was this world that this character named Jesus stepped into. Now, of course, I've been focusing mostly on the Roman origins hypothesis that posits that Jesus was just a myth and that it was a psychological operation created by the Romans. And I think any truther should be able to recognize a psychological operation when they see one. They can recognize it in the 20th century with the Kennedy assassination, or something like 9/11, or any number of other things that were involved in recent times that are psychological operations done by our great intelligence agencies. But this Roman origins hypothesis and the story of the Gospels in particular has exactly the same fingerprints as those other psychological operations I mentioned, and it's quite convenient that nobody seems to be making those connections. Also, we've been looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have also been suppressed. These primarily Hebrew texts that were discovered in some caves about 20 miles from Jerusalem at Qumran in the 1940s and 50s, and somehow they were given custody of the scrolls was given to these Dominican priests, who promptly sat on them and didn't translate them like they said they were going to, and didn't disseminate them like they said they were going to, and instead hoarded them for 40 plus years until legal action was taken. And so an entire generation or two of scholars were unable to look at them, even though they were literally salivating to get their hands on them. And then when they were finally released, a new generation of scholars was around that didn't really recognize the impact that these things could have. But they are quite impactful in terms of especially the sectarian material, the material that's specific to the sect of Jews, pious Jews that were living at this fortress or monastery there in the desert, at Qumran, and they talked a lot about what was important to them, what was meaningful to them, how they saw themselves in history, how they, you know, envisioned their mission to be, and a narrative that includes a teacher of righteousness, a wicked priest, and a liar. And so now scholars are trying to figure out who is who. Some people obviously think that the teacher of righteousness is Jesus, but others think it's John the Baptist. And others think that it is James, the brother of Jesus. And some people think that the liar was Paul. Some people think the liar was Jesus. So, you know, these are some interesting questions that need to be worked through, but most people, most Christians, won't even read these documents because their priest or pastor has told them that they're evil or that they are irrelevant or that they shouldn't be read. You need to concentrate on the canonical books of the Bible and don't waste your time with all this other extraneous stuff. So I think that is the wrong approach. The right approach to me is to take in as much as you can and then use your discernment to figure out what you think is really true. So today we're on, I think, the 10th installment of looking at this book by Bronson Keeler, written way back in 1881, called History of the Bible. And so he goes into all kinds of different things, looks at all of the books that are not part of the Bible, including dozens of other Gospels and dozens of other books of Acts and other books of Revelation that Christians of today don't even seem to be slightly curious about. You would think that if they worship Jesus like they say they do, that they would at least be curious what all those other Gospels say about him, not just the four that were passed down to you through this long, sorted set of councils and conferences that the Catholic Church had in, late antiquity and early medieval times, that were kind of like melees, a lot of them, bloodbaths. Keeler, is not the last word on these subjects, but I think he is a word on the subject, and maybe would get you into doing some more research into the history of the Bible. He also talks about the perspectives of people back then, that people didn't see these New Testament documents as being sacrosanct. They altered them willy-nilly. Just because they didn't like what they said, they might switch something around. They didn't see them as inviolable. Like, you can't touch them, as we probably would nowadays. Now, he's in the middle of chapter 5 here, which is kind of an unfortunate chapter, I think, which is on were the fathers competent? Talking about all the early church fathers, such as Clement of Rome and Polycarp and St. Ignatius and Irenaeus and Origen, Tertullian, Philostratus, and these kind of people who kind of built the church. Now, some Roman origins hypothesis authors would contend that they were all Romans too, along with all the Apocrypha, that they were also created by the Romans as part of this psychological operation against the Jews in order to mellow out the Jews. But he takes these people to task for a lot of kind of superstitions that they had. But these are many superstitions that we also have here in the 21st century. The belief in demons and angels and kind of God's anthropomorphic streak, that he is, taking express interest in the minutia of our lives, and here he's talking about the so-called flat Earth and the so-called round Earth, which is really what he means, the spherical Earth. Again, because the flat Earth is also round, just like a pancake, and he kind of ridicules these early church fathers for having some of these beliefs as being superstitious and incompetent to actually judge the true texts. Now, I can agree with a lot of this, but I think that Keeler is disguising his own religion by doing so, which is scientific materialism. I believe, these Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, they think that Jesus will save us, or Yahweh will save us, Allah will save us. Well, the scientific materialists believe that science will save us. So, it's always somebody else that's got to do it. So I see, of all those religions, and then also including Satanism as a Western religion, which is really just the flip side of the coin of Christianity. It didn't really exist before Christianity, and most Satanists are only doing it because they hate Christians. Now if Christianity would be to be exposed for the psychological operation that it is, perhaps the Satanists would go on hating some other religion. But, the Satanism comes directly out of the New Testament, and then is amplified by later writers, and especially by Hollywood in the 20th century. All are images of Satan. The only mentions of Satan in the Old Testament are referring to actual human beings, not supernatural beings, as an obstacle or an adversary. Okay, now we're going to look into more of this chapter about the church fathers and how they're not competent to make these determinations of what's supposed to be in the church canon, and so on and so forth. Cyril of Jerusalem, late 4th century, quoted from Clement the story of the phoenix, and declared that God had created the bird expressly to enable men to believe in the resurrection. He said it was a wonderful bird, and yet it was irrational. It did not sing psalms to God, and it knew nothing of his holy begotten Son. Saint Chrysostom, early 5th century, believed the air was peopled with angels, and around the same time Jerome believed it was filled with demons. Still in the early 5th century, St. Augustine believed in demons. They tried to deceive men by persuading them that they were gods. They were called demons from the Greek daimones, or on account of their knowledge. To the early fathers, exact learning was devilish. There was also a class of satyrs and fauns called incubi, to whose lascivious attacks women were constantly subject, and demons termed by the Gauls Ducii, which perpetrated daily the same uncleanness. Of this there was so much trustworthy evidence that to deny it was an impertinence. So real and so universal was the belief in these lewd spirits that in 1484 Pope Innocent the Eighth issued a papal bull against them, and Burton, in his Anatomy of Melancholy, expresses his firm belief in them. St. Augustine affirmed that miracles were still performed in his day. A blind man at Milan had been cured by the relics of 2 martyrs. A personal friend of his named Innocent had been miraculously cured of an ailment, and he had seen it done with his own eyes. A lady had been cured of an incurable cancer. A man in the town of Curubis was miraculously cured of paralysis and hernia by being baptized. On a certain occasion, evil spirits which had afflicted some cattle were dispelled by prayer. A paralytic was cured by prayer and by contact with a piece of sacred earth which had been brought from the spot where Jesus was buried and whence he arose. A young man possessed of demons was relieved by the prayers and hymns of some women, but in departing the demons struggled fiercely, so that one, in passing out through the young man's eye, knocked that organ from the socket. It fell on his cheek and hung there by a vein till one of the women returned it to its place, and by 7 days praying and singing it was entirely healed. Now, I have to say that this shows this kind of scientific materialism. For some reason, he thinks that the author, Keeler, thinks that, you know, these miracles that these people are talking about it occurring in the 5th century couldn't have occurred in the 5th century, but he kind of implies that, well, they could have occurred in the 1st century or in biblical times. But now these things don't happen. And he's just kind of exposing his scientific materialism, I think, when in the early 20th century, maybe 25 years after he's writing this, when, you know, the theory of relativity, special relativity comes along and quantum theory comes along, we have a different understanding now in the 20th century that, like, your mind also plays a factor here. And so even if all of these healers are fraudulent, if the person being healed really believes, miracles can happen. It's not, you know, necessarily a matter of God stepping in and doing things. It's just a matter of you know, almost mind over matter or belief, just a really strong belief, or possibly even an imagination that is rehearsed over time. And the subconscious doesn't really know the difference between something imagined and something real. And so we can take advantage of those things. But at this time, he's not aware of these things. And so, you know, this whole message that he's conveying doesn't sit well, I don't think, with a 20th or 21st century understanding. So a young girl possessed of a demon was cured by the application of oil mixed with the tears of a bishop who was praying for her. The relics of the martyr Stephen had performed the most astonishing miracles, healing the blind, curing the sick, converting the impenitent, raising the dead. The 8th chapter of the 22nd book of his great work, The City of God, that's Augustine, is filled with the narration of these prodigies. Concerning the theory that the world was round, he said, but as to the fable that there are antipodes, that is to say, men on the opposite side of the earth, where the sun rises when it sets on us, men who walk with their feet opposite ours, that is on no ground credible. And indeed, it is not affirmed that this has been learned by historical knowledge, but by scientific conjecture, on the ground that the earth is suspended within the concavity of the sky, and that it has as much room on the one side of it as it does on the other. It hurts me to even read this because it's also foolish. But I mean, not only is it's just more foolish that he's even printing this as part of his book to kind of disparage these people. uh, mainly because of his scientific materialism. So, hence, they say that the part which is beneath must also be inhabited. But they do not remark that although it be supposed or scientifically demonstrated that the world is of a round and spherical form, yet it does not follow that the other side of the earth is bare of water, nor even though it be bare, does it immediately follow that it is peopled. For Scripture, which proves the truth of its historical statements by the accomplishment of its prophecies, gives no false information, and it is too absurd to say that some men might have taken ship and traversed the whole wide ocean and crossed from this side of the world to the other, and that thus even the inhabitants of that distant region are descended from that one first man, Adam. Okay. Cosmos Indicopleustes, 6th century, early to mid 6th century, was first a merchant and then a monk. The pagan notion was gaining place rapidly in his day as to the rotundity of the earth. The belief had been that it was flat and rested on the back of a turtle, the turtle on the back of a snake, and the snake on the back of an elephant. The Greeks had long held the theory of rotundity, and even those Greeks who came over to Christianity brought it with them. The church opposed it simply because it was Greek. Cosmas had, in his business, traveled over nearly the whole known world. He felt himself peculiarly fitted, therefore, to write on the subject, and the Christians in his time used his name, no doubt, as Christians in modern times have used famous reputations to intimidate honest unbelief. They would say, "You believe the world to be round? Has not Cosmas gone over it? Has he not been there? Does he not know? Do you set yourself up against that great Christian scholar?" Let me urge upon the reader never to yield to the pernicious habit of fearing simply a great name. It and scholarship do not, by any means, always go together, and the only way by which enlightenment and civilization can possibly make progress is through the determination of each individual member of society, no matter how humble he may be, to do his own thinking on all subjects when one man's thought is as good as another's, and such is the case in theology, and when he knows that he is right, to stand by it, though all the world be against him. One reason for the intolerable slowness with which men have escaped from the superstition of theology is, they have allowed themselves to be overawed with the names of Augustine, Jerome, Calvin, and other supposedly great thinkers who were, in fact, utterly incompetent to deal with the questions which they handled. Cosmas, seeing the wave of infidelity sweeping over the land concerning the flatness of the earth, wrote a work to counteract it. He called it Christian Topography, and said it was intended to denounce the false and heathen doctrine of the rotundity of the earth, and was to be a Christian description of the universe, established by demonstrations from divine scripture, concerning which it is not lawful for a Christian to doubt. According to him, the world is a rectangular plane, twice as long as broad. Okay, so he doesn't even have the round earth. He's got a rectangular flat earth. The heavens come down to the earth on the four sides like the walls of a room. The earth lies in the center with the ocean all about it. Beyond the ocean lies the untraversed land, the terrestrial paradise. On the north side of the earth is a mountain behind which the sun sets. And Cosmas lived in Egypt, where the sun seems to set in the north. The plane of the earth was not exactly horizontal, but inclined slightly from the north, for which reason which reason the Euphrates, the Tigris, and other rivers running southward are rapid, while the Nile and others running northward are slow. People who believed the earth to be round were blasphemers, given up for their sins to belief in that impudent nonsense. Similar science was taught by Patricius, Diodorus of Tarsus, and other Nestorian theologians. The Christian religion staked its all on the flatness of the earth's surface, and when science proved the rotundity, theology was dealt a blow from which it can never recover. Well, it seems to be recovering at this point because we know that the never a straight answer people are lying to us. And so, in my mind, I don't know that the earth is flat, but I know that whatever they're telling us is a lie. And so it might be flat. It might be, it might be shaped like a platonic solid. It might be hollow. It might be much bigger than we think it is. But I don't believe that science has proved the rotundity. It has given some solid evidence for it. Truly is it said, theology ever has been, as it ever must be, the barbarian's interpretation of the universe. Gregory the Great, about 600 AD, believed that volcanoes were the entrances to hell, and he tells a story of Theodoric and Pope John being cast in chains through the mouth of one of them into the lower regions. 2 nuns who had been excommunicated for talking too much were buried in the earthen floor of the church. When the deacon, in saying Mass, commanded all suspended persons to leave the edifice, the 2 nuns would arise from their graves and depart, to return after the Mass was over. Many persons had seen these resurrections, and the nuns continued them till they learned to hold their tongues, when the ban was removed and they rested peacefully in their tombs. A dead child was once raised to life simply by having a stocking, the relic of a holy man, placed on its bosom. Having no oil, lamps were fed with water and wicked with paper, and they burned perfectly. A city was on fire, and nothing could stay the ravages till Bishop Marcellinus threw himself against the flames, and they were immediately extinguished. A huge stone, which 500 yoke of oxen could not stir, was removed a long distance by prayer. A lamp, shattered to fragments, was mended perfectly, and exhausted oil vessels were filled. A certain monk died, and predestination was fulfilled, all in answer to prayer. Gregory's dialogues were filled with such narrations, and Henry James Coleridge, his biographer, says he was a great man and a great saint, and that he towered above his contemporaries and their immediate predecessors and followers. St. Thomas Aquinas, late 13th century, affirmed that diseases and tempests were the direct work of the devil, and Justin Martyr, Theophilus of Antioch, Athenagoras, Tatian, Cyprian of Carthage, Tertullian, Origen, Jerome, Lactantius, Eusebius, in fact, all the early Christians believed in demons. As I would say, a lot of people believe in demons today. So this is, not really hitting home as far as the ridicule that he's trying to put on these people. The New Testament writers believed in them. The air was peopled with them and with angels. Every fountain, every tree, every stream, every grove had its sprite. Everything that was done must be done under a miracle. The Almighty had to be invoked to perform the simplest things. Nothing was too great for the credulity of the fathers, provided only it was improbable, and nothing small enough for belief if it was at all probable. The erroneous and grotesque beliefs of the Christian fathers could be quoted until they filled a large volume, but these few will illustrate. There's a lot more than a few. This chapter should have been over about 10 pages ago. But these few will illustrate the intellectual condition of the ages which originated and transmitted the Bible to us. It will be said that the fathers were as good as their times. That cannot be maintained. They were not even as good. There were men in those days who saw that the world was round. The fact that Augustine, Lactantius, and other fathers opposed the theory shows that there were men who advocated it. In the quotations given above from Lactantius and Augustine, they recite quite fully the arguments which prove that the world was round. Yet the writers could not see that the arguments were valid, whereas other men could. In short, the sum of the charge against the fathers is that they were not competent to tell what was evidence of a fact and what was not. They cited as evidence of a theory things which are not in the slightest degree such, and they would look directly in the face of evidence which established theories they did not endorse and would still be unable to see that it was evidence. Now, if the fathers were great scholars, they should not have been so persistently in the wrong. They should have seen the truth at least as easily as the others did. What has become of the names and memories of the men in those days who stood up for the truth? Are they even yet called great? The Christian church has been honoring the wrong persons. I'm sorry. I'm just getting a lot of disturbances here today. Okay. Moreover, admitting for the sake of argument that these Christian fathers were as great as their time, we deny that they or their age were competent to form a Bible for this age. But one apology has ever been made for these remarkable errors of the fathers, and that is spiritual insight. Christian defenders say that while the fathers were ignorant and even superstitious, they were yet gifted with spiritual insight. This term signifies the possibility of perceiving something which does not exist and where it does not exist. It is synonymous with unlimited credulity. Not alone in nature, but also in literature, the fathers were ignorant and unscholarly. Jerome and Origen were the only ones who could read Hebrew, unless we accept Dorotheus. Justin Martyr quotes from Jeremiah and calls it Isaiah. Clement of Alexandria quotes